I want to begin this morning by asking you a question. Now, you all are churched people, right?
Right.
I'm assuming most of you believe in God. Most of you think it's worth it to be here, right?
Right.
Okay, just asking. What is the biggest headache or problem you face when you try and talk to an unchurched person about coming to church? Now, for years, John Haley and I wrestled over this. And John gave me the same answer as the rest of America. Well, I can't go to church, the roof will fall in. I think Chuck said that to me too. Well, it's cracked pretty bad, but it hadn't fallen in yet. 97% of the unchurched people out here, according to Aidan Adler, Dr. Aidan Adler, 97% of the unchurched people, if you ask them to come to church with you or encourage them to come to church, will say will answer in the negative. And the reason, whether it's conscious or subconscious, will be because they just don't feel worthy enough to be there. 97% of the unchurched people will answer in the negative, and it's because they, deep inside, may not be even conscious, but subconscious, they'll feel unworthy to come. Oh, if I go, the roof will fall in. Oh, I'm not smart enough. I'm not rich enough. I'm not holy enough. If God only knew all the stuff I've done. Well, here's a secret, folks. He knows. How many of you have ever experienced this? Where you've talked to somebody and that's the answer you get. Pretty sad, isn't it? Oh, I'm not worthy enough. You know, remember 1849? Anybody remembers what happened in 1849? Well, I know Johnny does because he was alive then. 1849, a marvelous thing happened in the United States of America. They discovered gold in California. Remember that? The 49ers. The biggest migration in the history of the United States to that point, from the eastern seaboard to the west, took place. People were selling all they had, their possessions, their home and everything, and buying a wagon and some horses and some supplies, and they were taking off for the west. In fact, that single event is probably more responsible for the population of the western states, particularly California, than any other migration in the history of the United States. When gold was discovered and then silver followed in Nevada, everybody was heading west. The problem was a lot of them didn't make it because it took 4, 6, 8 months to get there. You're on a wagon with a horse. You could walk faster. So it took them 6 or 8 months to get there. Now imagine, you got to use your imagination. Imagine if you could go back in time to that day, 1849, and speak to somebody in New York and say, hey, where are you going? And Johnny would say, he would be a young man then, about 25. And Johnny would say to me, well, I'm going to go to California. They found gold out there, and I'm going to look for it. Well, what if I said to Johnny, I can get you there in 4.5, 5 hours? What would you say to me? You'd say, well, you're nuts. Nobody can get from New York to California in 4. And I'm going to do it by putting you on a big hunk of metal that weighs 300,000 pounds. And it will carry 400 people with all their stuff. And it flies through the air. You would look at me like I had 5 heads. And then you'd probably take a stick and hit all 5 heads. And say, get away from me, crazy man. That was just 140 years ago. 140 years ago. And yet today, everybody and their mother's fighting for a seat on Delta to fly out to California to do whatever. 140 years ago, that would be unthinkable. Well, God's grace is a little like this. If you go to the unchurched and tell them, man, there's somebody in this world who thinks you're the best thing that's ever happened, who loves you, is going to heal you, going to take care of you, not just in this earth, but the whole forever. Because God's grace is that big and that good. Most of the unchurched, 97% of them, look at you like you have 5 heads and say, if I go to church, the roof will fall in. Just like Johnny would look at me and say, you're not putting me on a big hunk of metal and flying me through the air to California. And yet, 140 years later, the skies are filled with aircraft flying people everywhere. Why is God's grace still so hard to tell people about? If I whizzed Johnny 140 years ahead to the future and showed him these airplanes, would you believe it then? And yet the Bible has whizzed us ahead 2018 years, and still people are going, oh, I don't think that Jesus story, I can't believe it. Heaven for me? No. God, if God only knew what I did. He knows. Why is it so hard? The Bible tells us the only way you can be saved is by God's grace. It is by God's grace that we are saved, and even that's a gift of God. So that nobody has to boast about what they've done or what they haven't done. You are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for His good works, which God has prepared since the foundation of the world, that we should continue to walk every day of our life in that gift. And 97% of the non-churched still believe it's not for them. Oh, what a waste. We're going to talk about God's grace today and how we might understand it a little better and how we might present it to others a little better. First, I want you to stand up, stretch.